What if the man restocking vending machines in your office building wasn't just another service worker? What if the twin girls who seemed to spend all their time on laptops weren't just gaming but hunting something far more dangerous? And what if a chance encounter at a subway station would unravel a criminal network that had been operating in plain sight for years? This isn't a story about technology, it's about the courage to act when staying silent would be safer. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights in Central Station buzzed with their familiar electric hum, casting harsh shadows across the concrete platform. Rush hour had ended an hour ago, leaving behind scattered commuters, the occasional homeless person seeking shelter, and the persistent smell of coffee and exhaust. David Chen pushed his maintenance cart along the platform, methodically checking each vending machine, his movements precise and unhurried. To anyone watching, he was invisible, just another uniformed worker in the vast machinery of the city. The cart rattled softly as he wheeled it past the bench where two girls sat hunched over laptops, their fingers dancing across keyboards with an intensity that seemed unusual for their age. Twins, maybe 12 or 13, with matching dark hair pulled back in practical ponytails. One wore a faded NASA t-shirt, the other a hoodie with circuit board patterns. Their concentration was absolute, eyes never leaving their screens even as trains thundered past, shaking the platform. David had noticed them before. Same bench, same time, 3 days running. Most kids their age would be on their phones, scrolling through social media or playing mobile games. These two were different. Their posture spoke of purpose, not entertainment. The way they occasionally glanced around, checking who might be watching, reminded him of surveillance techniques he'd learned in another life. He finished replacing the energy drinks in the machine nearest their bench and moved on, but something made him pause. Through the reflection in the vending machine's glass, he watched as one of the girls suddenly tensed. Her sister immediately looked up from her own screen, and they began typing rapidly, their casual demeanor replaced by urgency. David had spent 8 years in military intelligence before his discharge. 2 more in private security, before Emma's cancer diagnosis changed everything. He knew the difference between children playing games and children working. These girls were working. A train arrived with a screech of brakes and pneumatic doors. The platform filled with evening commuters, briefcases and shopping bags creating a maze of movement. David continued his route, but kept the girls in his peripheral vision. They hadn't moved, hadn't even acknowledged the crowd flowing around them. Their focus remained laser-sharp on their screens. 20 minutes later, as the platform cleared again, David made his decision. He wheeled his cart to the machine directly behind their bench and began an unnecessary inventory check. From this angle, he could see their screens clearly. What he saw made his blood run cold. The girls weren't playing games or doing homework. They were tracking someone. Multiple windows showed what appeared to be security camera feeds, social media profiles, and location data. Chat logs scrolled past in a continuous stream, but the content was disturbing. References to packages, delivery schedules, and coded language that David recognized from his intelligence days. This wasn't teenage mischief. This was professional-level surveillance. The girl in the NASA shirt suddenly froze, her face going pale. She tapped her sister's arm twice. A clear signal. Both screens immediately went dark, replaced by innocent homework documents. But it was too late. David had seen enough. A man in an expensive suit approached their bench, moving with the casual confidence of someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere. Mid-40s, average height, the kind of face that disappeared in a crowd. He carried a leather messenger bag and checked his phone as he walked, but his eyes were scanning the platform systematically. When his gaze landed on the twins, something shifted in his expression. David's instincts, dormant for years, suddenly roared to life. Every detail registered simultaneously. The man's shoes, too expensive for the worn suit. The way he held his bag, protecting something valuable inside. Most importantly, the predatory focus as he assessed the 2 girls who were now pretending to study. The man sat down on the bench directly across from the twins, close enough to engage them in conversation, but far enough to appear casual. He pulled out his phone and began typing, but his attention never left the girls. After a moment, he stood and moved to the bench next to theirs, eliminating any escape route toward the main exit. David began moving his cart closer, his mind calculating angles and distances. The platform had security cameras, but they were poorly positioned and often non-functional. Transit police rarely patrolled this section during off-peak hours. If something happened here, these girls would be on their own. The man in the suit opened his messenger bag and pulled out what appeared to be candy, placing it casually on the bench between himself and the twins. When that failed to get their attention, he cleared his throat and spoke just loud enough for David to hear. "Excuse me, girls, I'm with the Metropolitan Youth Technology Program. I couldn't help but notice your impressive setup there. Are you students at Lincoln Academy?" The girl in the circuit board hoodie looked up first, her expression carefully neutral. "We're homeschooled," she said simply, then returned to her screen. "Even better," the man continued, his smile too wide, too practiced. "I run coding workshops for advanced students, private sessions, very exclusive. I could arrange something special for talented young ladies like yourselves." David felt his jaw clench. The man's body language screamed deception. The way he leaned forward, invaded their personal space, used phrases designed to make them feel special and selected. This was textbook predatory behavior, and these girls were clearly his target. But something else was happening. While the conversation continued, David noticed the girl in the NASA shirt had her laptop angled so her sister could see the screen. Her fingers moved almost imperceptibly across the trackpad, and suddenly both girls went very still. The man was still talking, now mentioning private studios and one-on-one mentoring, when the girl in the hoodie interrupted him. "That's really interesting, Mr. Peterson. Tell me, does the Metropolitan Youth Technology Program know that you've been using their name without authorization for the past 6 months?" The man's smile faltered. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "Robert Peterson, age 43, registered address 247 Riverside Drive. Apartment 12B. Except that apartment has been vacant for 2 years, and Robert Peterson died in a car accident in Nevada last December." David watched the color drain from the man's face. These weren't typical 12-year-old girls. They had somehow identified this man, accessed his information, and determined he was using a false identity. All in the span of a casual conversation. The girl in the NASA shirt spoke without looking up from her screen. "You've approached 14 different girls in the past month using variations of the same story. Always at train stations, always girls traveling alone, always with promises of exclusive opportunities." The man stood abruptly, his messenger bag clutched to his chest. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." "The misunderstanding," said the girl in the hoodie, her voice steady and mature beyond her years, "is that you thought we were just random kids. We're not." For a moment, the platform was silent, except for the distant rumble of an approaching train. The man looked around frantically, perhaps realizing that his carefully planned approach had somehow turned into an interrogation. His eyes landed on David, who was now standing directly behind the twins' bench, no longer pretending to service the vending machines. "Is there a problem here?" David asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. The man in the fake suit mumbled something about mistaken identity and backed away quickly, disappearing into the arriving crowd of the next train. David watched until he was certain the threat had passed, then turned his attention to the 2 girls who had just demonstrated skills that most intelligence professionals would envy. The girl in the NASA shirt finally looked up from her screen. "Thank you for staying close," she said simply. "We had the situation under control, but it's always good to have backup." David studied their faces, noting the calm competence, the lack of fear or surprise. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. The twins exchanged a look, some silent communication passing between them. Then the girl in the hoodie closed her laptop and stood. "Our names are Sarah and Jennifer Walsh," she said. "And we think you might be exactly the person we've been looking for." The maintenance cart suddenly felt like a prop from another life. David looked at these 2 young faces, at the expensive laptops they were now packing away with practiced efficiency, and realized that his quiet existence was about to become very complicated. "Why were you looking for me?" he asked. Sarah Walsh, the one in the NASA shirt, shouldered her backpack and met his eyes directly. "Because 3 weeks ago, our father disappeared while investigating a human trafficking network, and based on what we just saw, we think that man who approached us is connected to the people who took him." The platform around them suddenly felt much larger and much more dangerous. David had spent 2 years trying to disappear, to become invisible, to live a simple life maintaining vending machines and avoiding the complexities of his former world. But looking at these two girls, at their determined faces, and the weight of loss already settling on their young shoulders, he knew that his hiding was over. Jennifer Walsh pulled a card from her pocket and handed it to him. Plain white, with only a phone number written in neat handwriting. If you're David Chen, former staff sergeant, 82nd Intelligence Battalion, then we need to talk. Tonight. David took the card, his mind racing. They knew who he was. They had somehow identified him, tracked him, and orchestrated this entire encounter. But why? And how had two 12-year-old girls gained access to the kind of information that would reveal his military background? How did you find me? He asked. Sarah Walsh smiled, but it wasn't the smile of a child. It was the smile of someone who had learned to navigate dangerous waters and had developed skills far beyond her years. The same way we've been tracking the network that took our dad, she said. The same way we identified that predator who just tried to recruit us. The same way we're going to find the people responsible and make them pay. As the twins walked away toward the station exit, David stood alone on the platform, holding a card that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. His quiet life, his careful invisibility, his commitment to staying out of other people's fights. But as he thought about the man in the expensive suit, about his predatory approach to two young girls, about a father who had disappeared while fighting human traffickers, David realized something else. For the first time in 2 years, he felt like he had a purpose again. He looked down at the card one more time, then pulled out his phone and dialed the number. The voice that answered was crisp, professional, and belonged to someone far older than 12. Mr. Chen, Sarah Walsh said before he could speak. I was wondering when you'd call. The warehouse district at midnight felt like a graveyard of broken dreams and abandoned ambitions. Streetlights flickered intermittently, casting pools of sickly yellow light across cracked asphalt and rusted loading docks. David Chen sat in his battered Honda Civic, engine off, watching the entrance to a building that officially didn't exist according to city records. 24 hours had passed since his encounter with the Walsh twins at Central Station. 24 hours of phone calls, encrypted messages, and revelations that had turned his understanding of the world upside down. The girls hadn't just found him by accident. They had been hunting him for weeks, tracking his movements, analyzing his patterns, building a profile that would have impressed his former colleagues in military intelligence. Sarah Walsh emerged from the shadows between two abandoned trucks, moving with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to navigate dangerous spaces. At 13, she carried herself like a veteran operative, her eyes constantly scanning for threats while maintaining the appearance of casual confidence. Her twin sister Jennifer remained hidden somewhere in the darkness, providing overwatch through a network of hacked security cameras. David rolled down his window as Sarah approached. She didn't smile or offer pleasantries. Instead, she pulled a tablet from her backpack and handed it through the window. This is what we know, she said simply. The screen displayed a complex web of connections, photographs, financial records, and communication logs. At the center was a man David didn't recognize. Late 50s silver hair, expensive suit, the kind of face that belonged in corporate boardrooms or political fundraisers. The name beneath the photo read Marcus Blackwood, CEO of Meridian Logistics. Our father was Detective James Walsh, Metro Police, Special Victims Unit. Sarah continued, her voice steady despite the weight of the words. 3 months ago he started investigating a series of missing persons cases. Teenage girls, all from different neighborhoods, all with similar profiles.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Smart, isolated, vulnerable to promises of opportunity. David scrolled through the files, his trained eye catching details that painted a disturbing picture. Financial transfers between shell companies, shipping manifests with suspicious cargo weights, and communication intercepts that used coded language he recognized from his intelligence days. The pattern wasn't random. Sarah said, someone was targeting specific types of girls, recruiting them with offers of modeling contracts, internships, educational opportunities. Once they disappeared, the trail went cold. No bodies, no witnesses, no evidence. The tablet screen shifted to show a map of the city with red dots marking disappearance locations. The pattern was subtle but clear. A systematic sweep through neighborhoods where girls might be desperate enough to trust strangers offering hope. Dad got too close. Jennifer's voice crackled through a hidden speaker in Sarah's earpiece, loud enough for David to hear. He identified the connection between the disappearances and Meridian Logistics, started building a case. Then he vanished. David studied the files more carefully, his mind automatically analyzing the intelligence value of what he was seeing. The Walsh twins hadn't just compiled a collection of suspicions and theories, they had built a comprehensive intelligence package that would rival anything produced by federal agencies. The question was, how two 13-year-old girls had gained access to classified databases, financial records, and surveillance footage. "How did you get all this?" he asked. Sarah's expression didn't change. "Our dad taught us to think like investigators. When the official investigation stalled, we decided to continue his work. We have certain advantages that adult investigators don't. Such as, people don't suspect children of conducting surveillance. We can access places adults can't, and we're better with technology than most professionals." Jennifer's voice cut through the earpiece again. Movement at the north entrance. Black SUV, 3 occupants. "You need to wrap this up." Sarah reached for the tablet, but David held on to it. "What do you want from me?" The man who approached us at the station yesterday was Martin Torres, though he's been using a dozen different identities. He's connected to the trafficking network, but he's small-time. A recruiter. We need to work our way up the chain to find who took our father. And you think I can help you do that? Sarah finally allowed a ghost of a smile to cross her face. "Mr. Chen, we know about your service record. We know about the operations you ran in Afghanistan and Iraq. We know about the intelligence networks you helped dismantle. Most importantly, we know you have a daughter." David's blood went cold. "What about Emma?" Emma Chen, age 8, currently in remission from acute lymphoblastic leukemia, attending Riverside Elementary under the guardianship of her father who works multiple jobs to pay for her medical care. Sarah's voice softened slightly. "We're not threatening her, Mr. Chen. We're pointing out that you understand what it means to protect someone you love." The Honda's interior suddenly felt claustrophobic. David had spent 2 years building a new identity, creating distance between his family and his former life. The idea that 2 teenagers had pierced that veil so easily was both impressive and terrifying. "Time to go," Jennifer announced. "SUV is circling the block. They're looking for something." Sarah stepped back from the car. "Think about it, Mr. Chen. Our father disappeared because he was trying to save girls who had no one else to protect them. You can help us find him, or you can go back to stocking vending machines while more girls vanish. But you can't pretend you don't know anymore." She melted back into the shadows as efficiently as she had appeared. David sat alone in his car staring at the tablet screen that now displayed only a single message. "When you're ready to help, call the number. When you're ready to save lives, meet us at Pier 47 tomorrow night." The black SUV Sarah had mentioned cruised slowly past the warehouse entrance, its occupants scanning the area with professional thoroughness. David slumped lower in his seat and waited for them to pass. When the street was clear again, he started his engine and drove home through empty streets, his mind churning with questions and possibilities. His apartment was a sparse affair in a neighborhood that specialized in anonymity. 2 bedrooms, minimal furniture, walls bare except for a single photograph of Emma taken during one of her good days at the hospital. David made himself a cup of coffee he didn't want, and sat at his kitchen table, studying the intelligence package the Walsh twins had compiled. The scope of the operation was staggering. Meridian Logistics operated shipping facilities in 6 major cities, maintained offices in 12 countries, and processed cargo manifests that defied scrutiny. The company's financial records showed legitimate business operations alongside suspicious transactions that followed patterns David recognized from his military experience. Human trafficking networks relied on complex logistics, secure communication, and the ability to move people across borders without attracting attention. Meridian Logistics had all the infrastructure necessary to support such operations while maintaining the facade of legitimate business. But what disturbed David most was the sophistication of the recruitment strategy. The predators weren't grabbing random victims off the street. They were conducting psychological profiles, targeting girls with specific vulnerabilities, and using tailored approaches designed to build trust before exploitation. Martin Torres, the man who had approached the Walsh twins, was just one node in a network that extended far beyond simple opportunistic crime. This was organized, well-funded, and professionally managed. Taking down such an operation would require resources, expertise, and a willingness to operate outside official channels. David closed the tablet and looked at Emma's photograph. His daughter was asleep in the next room, safe and protected, trusting him to keep the world's darkness at bay. For 2 years he had done exactly that by avoiding any situation that might draw dangerous attention to their quiet life. But James Walsh had been doing the same thing. Protecting his daughters, investigating crimes that others ignored, fighting for victims who had no other champions. And now he was gone, leaving behind 2 girls who had inherited his sense of justice along with his enemies. David's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Meridian Logistics received a shipment tonight. Manifest shows industrial equipment. Actual cargo includes 6 teenage girls. Loading Dock 7, Pier 47. Window closes at dawn. Another message followed immediately. You can choose to ignore this information, but we can't. With or without your help, we're going to stop them. David stared at the messages until the screen went dark. Outside his window, the city continued its restless sleep, unaware of the predators moving through its streets. Somewhere in the darkness, 6 girls faced a nightmare that most people couldn't imagine. And 2 13-year-old investigators were preparing to take on a criminal network that had already claimed their father. He walked to Emma's bedroom, and stood in the doorway, watching her peaceful sleep. She had fought her own battle against an enemy that attacked from within, and she had won through courage, determination, and the support of people who refused to give up on her. Now other children needed that same fierce protection, and the people best positioned to provide it were asking for his help. David returned to the kitchen and picked up his phone. The number Sarah had given him answered on the first ring. "We thought you might call." Jennifer's voice was calm, professional, devoid of the uncertainty that should have belonged to someone her age. "Tell me what you need," David said. "Meet us at the observation deck overlooking Pier 47 in 1 hour. Come armed, but understand that we're gathering intelligence, not starting a war." "Not yet." The line went dead. David sat in his empty kitchen surrounded by the detritus of his attempt at normal life, and realized that normal had been an illusion all along. The world was full of predators and victims, hunters and protectors. For 2 years he had tried to exist in the space between, but that space was shrinking. He opened the closet in his bedroom and pushed aside work uniforms and casual clothes until his fingers found the locked case hidden behind winter coats he never wore. Inside were items from his former life, night vision equipment, encrypted communication devices, and a Glock 19 that had traveled with him through 2 deployments and a dozen operations. As he checked the weapon's condition and loaded a fresh magazine, David felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. But this time it wasn't about following orders or serving national interests. This time it was about 2 girls who had inherited their father's fight and 6 strangers who needed someone to stand between them and the darkness. An hour later, David crouched beside Sarah and Jennifer Walsh on a rooftop overlooking the industrial waterfront. Through binoculars, they watched as uniformed workers unloaded shipping containers under harsh floodlights. The operation moved with military precision, each person knowing their role, each task completed without wasted motion. "Container 7 Alpha," Jennifer whispered, pointing to a blue steel box being lifted from a cargo ship. "According to the manifest, it contains textile machinery from Southeast Asia. According to our intelligence, it contains people." David adjusted his night vision scope and focused on the container's movement. The hydraulic sounds of the crane were too loud to hear anything from inside, but the way the workers handled the container suggested they were aware of its precious and fragile cargo. "How many girls did you say?" he asked. 6, Sarah replied, ages 14 to 17. All reported missing from different cities over the past month, all recruited through social media, or direct approach with promises of modeling opportunities. As they watched, the container was loaded onto a waiting truck. The driver was the same man David had seen at the subway station, Martin Torres, still using his false identity, still playing his role in the larger machine. "Where is the truck going?" David asked. Jennifer consulted a tablet showing real-time GPS tracking. "Safe house in the warehouse district. They'll hold the girls there for processing before moving them to their final destinations." "Processing?" Sarah's voice hardened. "Psychological conditioning, breaking down their resistance, preparing them for sale." David lowered his binoculars and looked at the two girls beside him. They spoke about human trafficking with the clinical detachment of professionals, but he could see the rage burning behind their composed facades. This wasn't just about finding their father anymore. This was about stopping an atrocity that continued every day while the world looked away. "We can't let that truck reach the safe house," he said. Jennifer nodded. "We know. That's why we called you." The truck began moving, following a predetermined route through industrial streets designed for cargo transport rather than pedestrian traffic. David, Sarah, and Jennifer moved quickly across rooftops, using parkour skills that suggested extensive training. The girls moved like shadows, never silhouetted against the sky, never making sounds that would attract attention. They reached the intersection where they could intercept the truck, and David realized the twins had planned this operation with the same precision he had once applied to military targets. They had identified choke points, escape routes, and contingency plans. They had weapons, not guns, but electronic devices that could disable vehicles, jam communications, and document evidence. "What's the plan?" David asked. Sarah pulled a device from her backpack that looked like a modified smartphone. "Electromagnetic pulse, targeted frequency. It will disable the truck's engine and electronics without affecting anything else in the area. Jennifer will document the rescue with legally admissible video evidence. You'll handle any physical resistance. And then we call the police, report a truck accident, and ensure the girls receive medical attention while the evidence leads investigators to the next level of the network." David studied their faces in the dim light reflected from the harbor. These weren't children playing at being detectives. They were operatives conducting a mission with life or death consequences. Their father had trained them well, perhaps too well for their own safety. "After tonight, this network will know someone is hunting them," he said. "They'll increase security, change protocols, possibly eliminate witnesses. Are you prepared for that level of escalation?" The twins exchanged a look, another of their silent communications. Then Jennifer spoke for both of them. "Mr. Chen, they already killed our father for getting too close. They've already escalated. We're just catching up." The truck's headlights appeared at the far end of the street, moving steadily toward their position. David checked his weapon one final time, and settled into the shooting position behind a concrete barrier. Sarah activated her electromagnetic device, and Jennifer began recording with equipment that would capture evidence clear enough to use in federal court. As the truck approached their intersection, David realized that his quiet life was officially over. But for the first time in 2 years, he felt like he was exactly where he belonged. David Chen stared at the ceiling of his daughter's hospital room, watching the numbers on the heart monitor pulse in steady rhythm. Emma slept peacefully, despite the chaos of the pediatric ward, her small hands still clutching the stuffed elephant he had brought her 3 years ago when the cancer diagnosis first turned their world upside down. The morning light filtering through the windows should have felt hopeful, but all David could think about was the weight of the encrypted phone in his pocket and the message it had received an hour ago. The rescue operation at Pier 47 had gone exactly as planned. The truck's electronics had failed spectacularly when Sarah's device sent its targeted electromagnetic pulse, bringing the vehicle to a dead stop in the middle of the industrial district. Jennifer's cameras had captured everything in high definition, while David neutralized the 2 armed guards who accompanied Martin Torres. 6 terrified girls had been freed from the shipping container, and by the time police arrived, they had enough evidence to connect the trafficking operation directly to Meridian Logistics. But success had come with consequences. David should have anticipated. Marcus Blackwood wasn't the kind of man who accepted losses quietly, and the Walsh twins had underestimated how quickly a sophisticated criminal network could adapt to new threats. Emma stirred in her sleep, and David reached over to smooth a strand of hair from her forehead. The gesture was automatic, born from countless nights spent beside hospital beds, but today it carried additional weight. The encrypted message had been simple and devastating. "We know about your daughter, Riverside Elementary, Miss Patterson's third-grade class, room 214. Red backpack with unicorn patches. Calls you Daddy Bear. Stop investigating, or she'll need more than chemotherapy." David had been through enough operations to recognize professional intelligence gathering when he saw it. Someone had conducted surveillance on Emma, documented her routines, identified her vulnerabilities. The message wasn't just a threat, it was a demonstration of capability. These people could reach his daughter anytime they chose. Sarah Martinez entered the room carrying Emma's latest test results, her expression carefully neutral in the way doctors learned when delivering news that could transform lives. David had seen that look before, during the darkest days of Emma's treatment, and his stomach clenched reflexively. "The blood work looks good," Dr. Martinez said, settling into the chair beside Emma's bed. "White cell count is stable. No signs of relapse, but I'm concerned about the stress markers. Has something changed at home?" David glanced at Emma, who was pretending to sleep while obviously listening to every word. His daughter had developed an acute sensitivity to adult conversations during her illness, learning to read the subtle cues that indicated whether news would be good or bad. "Work has been complicated lately," David said carefully. "I might need to make some changes." Dr. Martinez nodded. "Emma's been through enough trauma. Stability is crucial during this phase of her recovery. Any major disruption could affect her immune system." The irony wasn't lost on David. In trying to help other children, he had potentially endangered his own daughter. The trafficking network had identified his weak point with surgical precision, and now he faced an impossible choice: abandon the Walsh twins and let the criminal operation continue, or persist in the investigation and risk Emma's safety. His phone buzzed with a text message from Jennifer Walsh: "Emergency meeting, coffee shop on 5th Street. 1 hour, come alone." David looked at Emma, who had given up pretending to sleep and was watching him with the too serious expression she wore when discussing important matters. "Daddy, are the bad people trying to hurt you again?" she asked quietly. The question hit him like a physical blow. Emma remembered the threats from his previous life, the reason they had moved 3 times in 2 years, the explanation for why he had abandoned his military career to stock vending machines. She understood more about danger than any 8-year-old should, and now he was bringing that darkness back into their carefully constructed safe haven. "I'm trying to help some people who need it," David said, "but it might be dangerous." Emma sat up in her hospital bed, her expression shifting to something beyond her years. "Like how the doctors helped me when I was sick, something like that. And if you don't help them, bad things will happen to other kids." David nodded, unable to trust his voice. Emma reached for his hand with the determination she had shown throughout her cancer treatment. "Then you have to help them, Daddy, even if it's scary. That's what heroes do." An hour later, David sat across from Jennifer Walsh in a coffee shop that catered to college students and freelance programmers. The teenager looked older than her 13 years, stress lines around her eyes that shouldn't have existed for someone her age. Sarah was notably absent, which immediately put David on alert. "Where's your sister?" he asked. Jennifer's jaw tightened. "They took her." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. David felt his training kick in, emotions shutting down to make room for tactical thinking. "When? How? Where?" 3 hours ago. She was conducting surveillance on Marcus Blackwood's downtown office building, routine intelligence gathering, maintaining distance, following protocols we've used dozens of times. Jennifer's voice remained steady, but David could see the tremor in her hands. "Security footage shows 4 men in a black van, professional extraction. No witnesses, no evidence left behind." David leaned forward. "Demands." Jennifer placed a tablet on the table between them, showing a video message that had been sent to her encrypted email. Marcus Blackwood appeared on screen, sitting behind an expensive desk in what looked like a corporate office. He was exactly as the intelligence files had described: silver-haired, authoritative, the kind of man who commanded respect through presence rather than volume. Miss Walsh Blackwood's recorded voice was calm, almost paternal. "Your sister is safe and will remain so as long as you demonstrate appropriate judgment. Your father made the mistake of believing he could operate outside established systems. I'm offering you an opportunity to avoid his fate." The video shifted to show Sarah Walsh sitting in what appeared to be a comfortable room, unharmed but clearly under guard. She looked directly into the camera and spoke with the same composure David had witnessed during their operations. "Jennifer, maintain operational security. Don't deviate from contingency plan 7. The evidence packages are distributed and secured. Complete the mission." Blackwood's face returned to the screen. "Your sister has 48 hours to decide whether she wants to join a productive organization or follow her father's path to disappointment. The choice is yours, Miss Walsh. Choose wisely." The video ended, leaving David and Jennifer in silence. Around them, college students discussed assignments and baristas prepared coffee orders, oblivious to the life and death drama playing out at a corner table. "Contingency Plan 7?" David asked. Jennifer's expression hardened with determination that reminded him of special operations soldiers he had served beside. "Sarah and I prepared for the possibility that one of us might be captured. All critical intelligence has been distributed to secure networks, backup systems are operational, and the investigation continues with or without us." "You're talking about going up against a professional criminal organization without your sister." "I'm talking about completing the mission we started when they killed our father." Jennifer leaned forward, her voice dropping to just above a whisper. "Mr. Chen, they didn't just take Sarah to stop our investigation. They took her because they're planning something big, and they need to eliminate all threats before it happens." Jennifer pulled up another file on her tablet, showing shipping manifests and financial records that painted a disturbing picture. Meridian Logistics was preparing for a massive operation, coordinating shipments from 12 different countries, moving resources and personnel with the precision of a military deployment. "Auction," Jennifer said simply. "They're organizing an international human trafficking auction. 200 victims, buyers from around the world, location somewhere in the metropolitan area. It happens in 72 hours. David studied the intelligence, his mind automatically calculating logistics and security requirements. The scope of the operation was staggering, requiring coordination between multiple criminal organizations, corruption of law enforcement and customs officials, and infrastructure capable of housing and processing hundreds of people. Your sister's capture wasn't random, he realized. They need her skills. Jennifer nodded. Sarah's the better hacker between us. If they're planning something this complex, they need someone who can manage electronic security, financial transfers, communication networks. They're trying to turn her into an asset. The coffee shop suddenly felt too public, too exposed. David glanced around, noting exit routes and potential surveillance positions out of habit. We need to move this conversation somewhere more secure. Agreed, but first you need to understand something. Jennifer's expression shifted, becoming even more serious. They threatened your daughter to keep you out of this investigation, but if we don't stop the auction, Emma won't be safe anyway. They've been recruiting girls from cancer support groups, targeting families dealing with medical expenses, offering to pay for treatment in exchange for cooperation. David's blood turned to ice. What are you saying? I'm saying they've had Emma on their target list for 6 months. The only reason they haven't approached her directly is because they were concerned about your background. But if this auction succeeds, if they establish permanent operations in this city, your daughter becomes a permanent target. Jennifer showed him another file, this one containing surveillance photos of Emma at school, at the hospital, playing in parks near their apartment. The images were taken with professional equipment from concealed positions, documenting her routines, with the thoroughness of a military intelligence operation. There's no walking away from this, Mr. Chen. They know who you are, where you live, what you care about. The only way to protect Emma is to destroy their entire operation. David stared at the photos of his daughter, feeling the familiar weight of impossible choices. Every instinct told him to grab Emma and run, to disappear into the witness protection networks he knew how to access, to prioritize her immediate safety over everything else. But Jennifer was right. Running would only delay the inevitable. These people had resources, patience, and the kind of institutional reach that made hiding a temporary solution at best. "What do you need from me?" he asked. Jennifer closed the tablet and met his eyes directly. "I need you to help me infiltrate Blackwood's organization, locate where they're holding Sarah and the auction victims, and document enough evidence to ensure federal prosecution. I need you to be the soldier you used to be, not the maintenance worker you've been pretending to be. And in return, we save my sister, stop the auction, and eliminate the threat to your daughter permanently." Jennifer's voice carried the weight of someone who had already lost everything and was fighting to prevent others from suffering the same fate. "But I need to know you're committed. If you're going to hesitate when lives are on the line, if you're going to prioritize your own safety over the mission, then you're no good to me." David thought about Emma's words in the hospital room, about heroes doing what needed to be done even when it was scary. He thought about Detective James Walsh, who had died trying to protect children he had never met. He thought about Sarah Walsh, 13 years old and sitting in a room somewhere, probably planning her own escape while trying to protect intelligence that could save hundreds of lives. Most of all, he thought about the photographs of his daughter taken by predators who saw her as nothing more than potential merchandise. "Tell me the plan," David said. Jennifer Walsh smiled for the first time since they had met, and David realized he was looking at the most dangerous 13-year-old in the world. "First," she said, "we're going to make Marcus Blackwood think he's won. Then we're going to destroy everything he's built, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but evidence and prison sentences." David's phone buzzed with another encrypted message, but this time he didn't check it. Whatever threats or ultimatums Blackwood's organization wanted to send could wait. Right now, David Chen was no longer a maintenance worker trying to avoid his past. He was a soldier preparing for war, and he had just found his mission. The coffee shop around them continued its peaceful routine, customers coming and going, conversations flowing like background music. But at their corner table, two people were planning an operation that would either save hundreds of lives or get them all killed. David looked at Jennifer Walsh, this remarkable child who had inherited her father's sense of justice and her sister's technical skills, and realized that sometimes the most unlikely allies were exactly what a mission required. "When do we start?" he asked. Jennifer was already packing up her equipment. "We already have. Blackwood thinks he's eliminated the primary threat by taking Sarah. He doesn't know that the most dangerous part of our operation was always the part he couldn't see coming." As they prepared to leave, David felt the familiar sensation of crossing a line from which there would be no return. But this time, instead of following orders from distant commanders, he was choosing to fight for something that mattered personally. Emma's safety, Sarah's freedom, and the lives of victims who had no other champions. The war had begun, and Marcus Blackwood had no idea what he was about to face. The glass elevator climbed silently toward the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower, carrying David Chen deeper into enemy territory than he had ventured since his discharge from military intelligence. His reflection in the polished steel doors showed a man transformed, expensive suit, confident posture, the kind of presence that belonged in corporate boardrooms and high-stakes negotiations. The transformation was more than cosmetic. Jennifer Walsh had spent 3 days reconstructing his identity, creating a digital footprint that would withstand professional scrutiny. According to the carefully crafted records now existing in multiple databases, David Chen was a former Defense Department contractor specializing in logistics security, recently hired by Meridian Logistics to consult on international shipping operations. His military background was acknowledged but sanitized, his technical expertise documented, his financial motivation apparent. Most importantly, his daughter's medical expenses provided a plausible reason for accepting employment with an organization that operated in moral gray areas. The elevator stopped, and David stepped into a reception area that screamed understated wealth. Marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic city views, and artwork that probably cost more than most people's houses. The receptionist, A woman in her 30s with the kind of professional polish that came from expensive education and careful grooming, looked up from her computer with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Chen, Mr. Blackwood is expecting you. Conference room 7, down the hall to your right." David nodded his thanks and walked through corridors, lined with photographs showing Meridian Logistics operations around the world. Shipping ports, cargo facilities, smiling employees in various international locations. The images projected legitimate business success, but David's trained eye caught details others might miss. Security cameras positioned for surveillance rather than safety, personnel wearing earpieces that suggested constant communication, and shipping manifests visible in several photos that showed cargo codes he recognized from his intelligence days. Conference room 7 contained 6 people arranged around a polished table that could have accommodated twice that number. Marcus Blackwood sat at the head, exactly as he appeared in the surveillance photos but more imposing in person. Late 50s, silver hair perfectly styled, wearing a suit that probably cost more than David's monthly rent. His presence filled the room despite his relaxed posture, and when he smiled at David's entrance, the expression held genuine warmth that made him more dangerous than any obvious villain. "Mr. Chen, welcome to Meridian Logistics. Please have a seat. I believe you'll find our proposal quite compelling." David took the indicated chair, and found himself studying faces around the table that represented the administrative structure of a criminal empire. Legal counsel, financial advisors, operations coordinators, and security personnel, all carrying themselves with the confident competence of professionals who happened to work in an industry that destroyed lives for profit. Blackwood gestured to a woman sitting to his right, early 40s with the kind of sharp intelligence that David associated with military planners. "This is Director Sarah Vance, our head of international operations. She'll be briefing you on the specific challenges we face." Vance activated a presentation screen, and began displaying logistics networks that looked impressive until David realized what they actually represented. Shipping routes designed to avoid international monitoring, cargo manifests structured to confuse customs inspections, and transportation schedules coordinated across multiple time zones with the precision of military operations. "Mr. Chen, your background in defense logistics makes you uniquely qualified to help us streamline certain aspects of our international shipping operations," Vance said, her tone professional and completely devoid of acknowledgement that they were discussing human trafficking infrastructure. "We've been experiencing inefficiencies in our cargo processing, particularly with sensitive shipments that require special handling." David leaned forward, projecting the interest of a consultant analyzing a business problem. "What kind of sensitive cargo?" Blackwood's smile widened slightly. "The kind that requires discretion, careful climate control, and absolute security. Our clients pay premium prices for guaranteed delivery, and we've built our reputation on meeting even the most challenging requirements." The euphemisms were professionally crafted, designed to allow everyone in the room to maintain plausible deniability while discussing the logistics of moving human beings like cargo. David felt his jaw clench involuntarily, but forced his expression to remain neutral. "I assume you have specific security concerns that brought me to your attention," David said. Vance nodded and displayed a new slide showing surveillance footage from the Pier 47 operation. David watched himself on screen, moving with military precision as he neutralized the guards and secured the shipping container. The video quality was excellent, capturing details that would allow skilled analysts to assess his training and capabilities. "Recent incidents have highlighted vulnerabilities in our operational security," Vance continued. "Someone with significant technical resources and professional training has been targeting our transportation networks. We believe your expertise could help us identify and eliminate these threats." David studied the footage, noting details that revealed how thoroughly Meridian Logistics had investigated his background. They knew about his military service, his intelligence training, and his operational capabilities, but they had missed the connection to the Walsh twins, which meant Jennifer's digital deception was holding up under professional scrutiny. "Impressive work," David said, gesturing toward the screen. "Whoever conducted that operation had military training and significant technical support. Have you identified the perpetrators?" Blackwood's expression darkened slightly. "We've made progress. The individual responsible had a partner, a young woman with exceptional computer skills. She's currently our guest while we discuss potential career opportunities. David felt his pulse accelerate but kept his voice steady. Career opportunities. Talented individuals sometimes find themselves on the wrong side of business disputes. Blackwood said, "We prefer to resolve such conflicts through employment rather than more permanent solutions. Miss Walsh has skills that could benefit our organization significantly." The casual mention of Sarah's name was clearly intended to gauge David's reaction. He maintained his expression of polite interest while calculating distances to exits and cataloging potential weapons in the conference room. "What kind of skills?" David asked. Vance pulled up another presentation slide showing network diagrams and security assessments that could only have been produced by someone with Sarah's technical expertise. "Miss Walsh has demonstrated remarkable abilities in cybersecurity, financial systems analysis, and digital surveillance. Under proper supervision, she could help us enhance our operational security significantly." David realized they were showing him Sarah's work, probably produced under duress to demonstrate her value to the organization. The technical analysis was brilliant, identifying vulnerabilities in law enforcement databases and suggesting countermeasures that would make future investigations nearly impossible. "Where does she fit into the immediate operational requirements?" David asked. Blackwood leaned back in his chair, his expression becoming more calculating. "We have a significant event scheduled for tomorrow evening. International clients, high-value transactions, complex logistics. Miss Walsh's skills will be essential for managing the technical aspects of the operation." David felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. The auction Jennifer had described wasn't just a business transaction for Meridian Logistics, it was a demonstration of capability, designed to establish their dominance in international human trafficking markets. Sarah's forced participation would ensure the technical infrastructure functioned flawlessly while providing Blackwood with leverage over the Walsh twins' investigation. "And my role in this operation?" David asked. Vance smiled, but the expression held no warmth. "Physical security, Mr. Chen. We need someone with your background to ensure our guests remain comfortable and our clients feel secure during their transactions." The meeting continued for another hour, with detailed discussions of security protocols, transportation logistics, and contingency planning. David absorbed every detail while maintaining his cover as a consultant motivated by financial necessity rather than moral conviction. By the time Blackwood dismissed the meeting, David had a comprehensive understanding of the auction's structure and timeline. As the other participants filed out of the conference room, Blackwood gestured for David to remain behind. They sat alone in the elegant space, two men who had spent their careers in violence now facing each other across a polished table. "Chen, I want to be completely transparent with you," Blackwood said, his tone shifting to something more personal. "Your military record is impressive, but it also indicates someone who values loyalty and follows orders. The work we do here requires both qualities." David met his gaze steadily. "I understand the importance of operational security." "Good, because tomorrow evening's event represents years of planning and significant investment. Any disruption would be unfortunate for all involved." Blackwood paused, allowing the threat to settle. "I trust you understand the stakes." "Completely," David replied. Blackwood stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "Your daughter is beautiful, Mr. Chen. 8 years old, currently in remission from acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Such a fighter, from what I understand." David felt his blood turn to ice, but his voice remained steady. "Yes, she is. Medical expenses can be overwhelming, even with insurance. I imagine the stress of her treatment affected your career decisions significantly." Blackwood turned back toward David, his expression sympathetic. "We take care of our employees, Mr. Chen. Comprehensive health benefits, educational support, long-term security. Emma would never want for anything." The implicit threat was clear. Cooperation meant security for his daughter. Resistance meant consequences David couldn't protect her from. But Blackwood had made a crucial error in revealing how thoroughly they had investigated Emma's situation. The threat confirmed that Jennifer's analysis had been correct. There was no walking away from this conflict. "I appreciate the comprehensive benefits package," David said carefully. "Excellent. Director Vance will provide you with detailed briefing materials and security protocols. The event begins tomorrow at 8 p.m. I trust you'll find the work educational. David left the Meridian Tower with a briefcase full of operational documents and a clear understanding of what he faced. The auction would take place in a converted warehouse facility in the industrial district, with security provided by professional contractors and technical support managed by Sarah Walsh under armed supervision. 200 victims from 12 countries would be transported to the site throughout the day, processed through a system designed to maximize profit while minimizing the possibility of rescue or escape. But Blackwood had also provided David with exactly what he needed: complete access to the operational structure, detailed security protocols, and most importantly the location where Sarah was being held. David drove through the city toward his meeting with Jennifer, his mind already working through tactical possibilities. The warehouse facility would be heavily defended, but it was also isolated from civilian populations. The auction participants would be criminals themselves, reducing concerns about collateral damage. Most importantly, the concentration of evidence and perpetrators in a single location offered an opportunity to dismantle the entire network simultaneously. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Daddy, I'm scared but I'm okay. Trust Jennifer. Complete the mission. Save everyone you can." David pulled over and stared at the message, recognizing Sarah's writing style despite the unknown sender. Somehow she had managed to communicate from inside Blackwood's facility, providing confirmation that she was alive and maintaining operational security despite her captivity. A second message arrived immediately. "They think I'm broken, but I'm just getting started. Tomorrow night, everything changes." David smiled grimly and deleted the messages. Sarah Walsh was still fighting, which meant the mission remained viable. But more importantly, her communication confirmed that Jennifer's contingency planning had included methods for maintaining contact even under the worst circumstances. The Walsh twins had spent months preparing for exactly this scenario, and now David understood why they had recruited him. They didn't need someone to rescue them. They needed someone who could help them rescue everyone else. As David drove toward his rendezvous with Jennifer, he felt the familiar sensation of pre-mission adrenaline, the heightened awareness that came with approaching combat. But this time the stakes weren't abstract geopolitical objectives. This time he was fighting for his daughter's future, for Sarah's freedom, and for 200 victims who had no other champions. Tomorrow evening, Marcus Blackwood would discover that recruiting David Chen had been the worst mistake of his criminal career. The soldier was back, and this time he was fighting a war that mattered. The converted warehouse in the industrial district looked unremarkable from the outside, just another aging building among dozens of similar structures that had once housed legitimate businesses. But as David Chen approached the loading dock entrance at 7:30 in the evening, he could see the subtle signs of professional security preparation. Motion sensors disguised as utility equipment, surveillance cameras positioned to eliminate blind spots, and personnel who carried themselves with the disciplined posture of military contractors. David's earpiece crackled with Jennifer Walsh's voice, transmitted through an encrypted channel that piggybacked on legitimate radio frequencies. Perimeter security shows 12 external guards rotating patrols every 15 minutes. Internal layout matches the blueprints we obtained, but thermal imaging suggests additional personnel in the basement level. "Acknowledged," David murmured, adjusting his tie as he approached the main entrance. His suit concealed body armor and tactical equipment, while his briefcase contained electronic devices Jennifer had modified for the operation. To any observer, he looked like another well-dressed consultant arriving for a high-stakes business meeting. The security checkpoint just inside the entrance was staffed by 2 guards who processed David's credentials with professional efficiency. They scanned his identification, checked his name against an approved access list, and conducted a thorough but respectful search that found nothing more threatening than his legitimate business materials. The weapons and surveillance equipment Jennifer had provided were designed to pass casual inspection while remaining functional when needed. Beyond the checkpoint, the warehouse had been transformed into something resembling a luxury hotel combined with a high-security facility. The main floor was divided into multiple areas, reception spaces where well-dressed individuals mingled with drinks and conversation, viewing areas with comfortable seating arranged around raised platforms, and administrative sections where transactions would be processed with the efficiency of any legitimate auction house. But the underlying reality was far more sinister. The platforms were designed for displaying human beings like merchandise. The comfortable seating was arranged to provide optimal viewing angles for potential buyers evaluating their purchases. The administrative areas contained financial systems capable of processing millions of dollars in untraceable transactions. Everything was designed to make the buying and selling of human lives feel like a normal business operation. David moved through the crowd, noting faces and identifying potential threats while maintaining the demeanor of a security consultant familiarizing himself with the venue. The auction participants represented international criminal organizations, corrupt government officials, and wealthy individuals whose appetites extended beyond legal boundaries. They spoke in multiple languages, conducted business with casual brutality, and treated the evening's activities as simply another investment opportunity. Director Vance approached him near the main viewing area, carrying a tablet displaying real-time security monitoring data. Mr. Chen, everything appears to be proceeding smoothly. The first group of merchandise will be presented in 30 minutes. I trust you've familiarized yourself with the facility layout. Completely, David replied, accepting the tablet and studying the security feeds. The screen showed the warehouse's multiple levels, including basement areas where victims were being held in conditions that would have violated every international human rights treaty ever written. What about the technical support staff? Miss Walsh is managing network security from the control room on the second level. She's been quite cooperative once she understood the benefits of collaboration. Vance's smile held the cold satisfaction of someone who believed they had successfully converted an enemy into an asset. Her sister's continued well-being provided excellent motivation. David felt his jaw clench but maintained his professional expression. And contingency planning for potential disruptions. Comprehensive. Local law enforcement has been advised of a private security exercise in the area. Any outside interference will be handled through official channels we control. Miss Walsh has also implemented electronic countermeasures that will prevent unauthorized communications or surveillance. As Vance continued her briefing, David's earpiece delivered a burst of static followed by Jennifer's voice, heavily distorted but still intelligible. Phase 1 complete. External communications are blocked, but our internal network remains operational. Sarah has maintained access to critical systems despite their supervision. David nodded thoughtfully at Vance's explanation of security protocols while actually acknowledging Jennifer's update. The twins had anticipated that Blackwood's organization would isolate the facility electronically, and they had prepared countermeasures that allowed them to maintain communications despite the jamming systems. Mr. Chen, I need you to conduct a final inspection of the merchandise areas before we begin, Vance said, gesturing toward a staircase leading to the basement level. Some of the newer acquisitions have shown signs of resistance that could disrupt the presentation. David followed Vance downstairs into conditions that transformed his controlled anger into something approaching rage. The basement had been divided into dozens of small holding cells, each containing multiple victims in various stages of psychological conditioning. The systematic cruelty was designed to break down resistance and create compliance through terror and despair. Young women from multiple countries sat or lay on thin mattresses, their eyes reflecting the kind of trauma that left permanent scars. Some appeared catatonic, others wept quietly, and a few maintained defiant expressions that suggested their spirits hadn't been completely broken. The diversity of victims represented a global operation that had been operating for years, destroying lives across multiple continents. The conditioning process has been quite effective, Vance explained with the clinical detachment of someone discussing livestock management. We've found that controlled stress combined with strategic isolation produces optimal compliance within 72 hours. David forced himself to respond professionally while memorizing details that would be essential for coordinating the rescue operation. What about security concerns during transport to the presentation areas? Minimal. The subjects have been conditioned to understand that resistance leads to consequences they cannot endure. Most will comply with basic instructions, and those who don't can be managed through pharmaceutical assistance. As they moved through the basement areas, David caught glimpses of the logistical infrastructure that supported the operation. Medical stations for maintaining the victim's physical health, administrative areas for processing documentation, and communication systems for coordinating with international partners. The scope and sophistication of the operation represented millions of dollars in investment and years of careful planning. But David also noticed security vulnerabilities that Jennifer's intelligence gathering had accurately identified. Fire suppression systems that could be activated remotely, electrical distribution panels that controlled lighting and surveillance cameras, and structural support columns that were essential for the building's integrity. The Walsh twins had planned their operation with the same attention to detail that Blackwood's organization applied to their criminal enterprise. "Mr. Chen, there's one more area I need to show you," Vance said, leading him toward a heavily secured section of the basement. "We've had some concerns about potential sabotage attempts, and your expertise in threat assessment would be valuable." The secured area contained the facility's primary computer systems, financial transaction networks, and communication equipment. At the center of the technology array, Sarah Walsh sat at a workstation surrounded by multiple monitors displaying code, network diagrams, and security protocols. She appeared unharmed but was clearly under close supervision by armed guards who watched her every movement. Sarah looked up as David and Vance entered, her expression carefully neutral, but David caught the brief eye contact that confirmed she recognized him and was prepared for whatever came next. Despite her captivity, she projected the same calm competence he had witnessed during their previous operations. "Miss Walsh has been quite helpful in optimizing our security systems," Vance said. "Her modifications have made our networks virtually impenetrable to outside interference." Sarah spoke for the first time since David's arrival, her voice steady and professional. "The current configuration should protect against any conventional cyber attacks. However, I've identified some potential vulnerabilities that require additional hardware to address completely." David realized that Sarah was communicating in code, providing information about the systems she had secretly compromised while appearing to strengthen them. Her apparent cooperation was actually preparation for sabotage that would cripple the entire operation at the critical moment. "What kind of vulnerabilities?" David asked. Sarah pulled up a technical diagram that looked like a standard network security analysis but actually contained tactical information disguised as technical specifications. "Primarily concerns about cascade failures if multiple systems are stressed simultaneously. The financial networks are particularly vulnerable to synchronized disruption." Vance nodded approvingly. "Precisely why we value your expertise, Miss Walsh. Mr. Chen, I believe you understand why we're confident in our operational security." As they returned to the main level, David's earpiece delivered another update from Jennifer. "Assault teams are in position at designated entry points. Federal backup is standing by for evidence collection. Medical teams are prepared for victim treatment and evacuation. We're ready to proceed on your signal." The scale of the response Jennifer had coordinated became clear as David moved through the warehouse. This wasn't just a rescue operation conducted by a teenager and a discharged soldier. The Walsh twins had built a coalition that included federal law enforcement, international human rights organizations, and specialized rescue teams with experience in trafficking operations. But David also understood that success depended on precise timing and coordination. The warehouse contained over 200 victims, dozens of heavily armed security personnel, and international criminals who would fight desperately to avoid capture. Any mistake could result in casualties among the people they were trying to save. The auction began promptly at 8 p.m. with Marcus Blackwood taking the podium to address the assembled buyers. His presentation was professionally polished, emphasizing the quality of the merchandise, the security of the transactions, and the exclusive nature of the event. He spoke about human beings with the same enthusiasm that legitimate businessmen use to describe luxury products, making the horror feel normalized and acceptable. David positioned himself near the main viewing area where he could observe both the auction proceedings and the security arrangements. The first group of victims was brought onto the platform, young women who moved with the mechanical compliance of people whose spirits had been systematically broken. The buyers evaluated them with the cold calculation of livestock traders, discussing features and qualities that reduced human beings to collections of attributes. As the bidding began, David activated the communication device Jennifer had provided, sending a coded signal that would initiate the final phase of their operation. Throughout the facility, carefully placed devices began their work. Security cameras developed mysterious malfunctions. Communication systems experienced intermittent disruptions. Electronic locks started operating unreliably. Sarah Walsh, still under guard in the computer center, began implementing the sabotage protocols she had hidden within Blackwood's security systems. Financial networks that processed auction payments suddenly became unstable. Surveillance systems that monitored the basement areas began showing false information. Emergency systems designed to lock down the facility in case of threats started responding to phantom triggers. The disruptions began subtly, designed to create confusion without immediately alerting security personnel to coordinated attack. But as the auction continued, the technical problems escalated. Lights flickered throughout the facility. Communication systems produced static and interference. The electronic displays showing auction information began showing error messages. Marcus Blackwood noticed the problems during the third round of bidding and gestured for Director Vance to investigate. The professional competence that had characterized the evening began giving way to frustrated confusion as technical staff struggled to identify and resolve issues that seemed to multiply faster than they could be addressed. David's earpiece crackled with Jennifer's voice. Phase 2 initiated. Building systems are compromised. Rescue teams are moving to entry positions.
He says,
Maintain cover until the final signal. The auction participants were becoming restless as the technical difficulties continued. Some demanded explanations for the delays. Others began discussing whether to leave and conduct their business elsewhere. The atmosphere of controlled luxury was deteriorating into something approaching chaos. Then the lights went out completely. Emergency lighting activated automatically, casting the warehouse in dim red illumination that transformed the elegant auction venue into something resembling a scene from a nightmare. Security personnel immediately went to high alert, drawing weapons and establishing defensive positions while trying to determine whether they were facing equipment failure or coordinated attack. David moved through the crowd toward the staircase leading to the basement level, using the confusion to reach the areas where victims were being held. Around him, the auction participants were demanding explanations and safe evacuation while Blackwood's security team tried to maintain order and assess threats. Jennifer's voice filled his earpiece with urgent intensity. Go, 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 all teams are moving. Building is secured. Rescue operations are active. The warehouse erupted into controlled chaos as tactical teams entered through multiple access points simultaneously. Federal agents in full combat gear moved with military precision, securing areas and neutralizing resistance, while specialized rescue teams focused on locating and evacuating victims. The operation unfolded with the coordination of a military assault designed to minimize casualties while maximizing arrests. David reached the basement level as rescue teams were already working to free victims from their holding cells. Medical personnel moved through the areas, providing immediate care to people who had endured weeks or months of systematic abuse. The professionalism and compassion of the rescue workers stood in stark contrast to the casual cruelty that had characterized the trafficking operation. Sarah Walsh emerged from the computer center, accompanied by federal agents who had secured the area and arrested her guards. She looked exhausted but determined, carrying hard drives and documentation that would provide evidence against every participant in the international network. David, Sarah called out as she saw him. The financial systems are completely compromised. Every transaction, every payment, every communication is preserved. We have evidence that will destroy their entire operation.
Jennifer appeared at the top of the basement stairs, her face showing the strain of coordinating the complex rescue operation, but also the satisfaction of seeing months of planning come to fruition. She carried laptops and communication equipment that had allowed her to maintain command and control throughout the assault. Status report, David said as he reached the twins. 214 victims secured and receiving medical attention. Jennifer replied with professional efficiency. 63 arrests including Blackwood and all primary leadership. Financial networks completely mapped and frozen. International warrants being issued for network participants in 12 countries. Sarah added, the evidence package includes everything. Financial records, communication logs, shipping manifests, personnel files, victim documentation. Every aspect of their operation is documented and preserved. As they moved toward the main level, David could see the scope of the law enforcement response Jennifer had coordinated. The warehouse was swarming with federal agents, international investigators,
medical personnel and victim services specialists. The operation had been planned not just to rescue the immediate victims, but to dismantle the entire international network permanently. Marcus Blackwood sat in restraints near the loading dock, his earlier confidence replaced by the grim realization that his criminal empire was ending. Director Vance and the other leadership personnel were similarly secured, their professional competence useless against the comprehensive investigation that would follow. But the real victory wasn't the arrests or the seizure of assets. It was visible in the faces of the victims who were being treated with dignity and compassion for the first time in months. Medical teams worked to address immediate health concerns while victim services specialists began the long process of providing psychological support and assistance with reintegration. David found himself standing outside the warehouse as emergency vehicles continued arriving and departing. The industrial district that had seemed so isolated and forgotten was now the center of one of the largest human trafficking investigations in history. The operation that had taken place in darkness and secrecy was being exposed to light and scrutiny that would prevent it from ever operating again. Jennifer approached him, no longer the 13-year-old girl who had recruited him at a subway station, but a professional investigator who had orchestrated a complex international operation. "Mr. Chen, there's something else you need to know." She led him to an ambulance where a man in his 40s was receiving medical attention. Despite his injuries and obvious exhaustion, David recognized him immediately from the photos Jennifer and Sarah had shown him weeks earlier. "Dad," Sarah called out as she saw Detective James Walsh for the first time since his disappearance. James Walsh looked up from the stretcher, his eyes finding his daughter's with an expression of pride and relief that spoke to months of fear and uncertainty. "Sarah, Jennifer, I knew you'd find a way." David stepped back as the twins reunited with their father, understanding that this moment belonged to them. But James Walsh looked over at him with the recognition of one professional acknowledging another. "Mr. Chen," James said, his voice hoarse but clear, "thank you for protecting my girls. They told me what you risked to help them." David nodded, feeling the weight of the past weeks settling into something resembling resolution. "They didn't need much protection. They're remarkable investigators." James smiled despite his obvious pain. "They get that from their mother. She would have been proud of what they accomplished here." As the ambulance prepared to transport James Walsh to the hospital for comprehensive medical evaluation, David realized that his role in the operation was ending. The immediate threat had been eliminated, the victims were receiving care, and the investigation would continue through official channels with resources far beyond what any individual could provide. But Jennifer approached him one final time before joining her father and sister in the ambulance. "Mr. Chen, this isn't the end. The evidence we gathered tonight will lead to investigations around the world. There will be more networks to expose, more victims to rescue. If you ever decide that stocking vending machines isn't challenging enough, you know how to reach us." David smiled at the invitation, understanding that the Walsh family had offered him something he hadn't expected to find again, a sense of purpose that went beyond simple survival. "I'll keep that in mind." 3 weeks later, David sat in Emma's hospital room reading news reports about the international investigation that had grown out of the warehouse operation. Arrests had been made in 15 countries, dozens of trafficking networks had been dismantled, and hundreds of victims had been rescued and provided with support services. Emma looked up from her homework, studying her father's face with the perception that had developed during her illness. "Daddy, you look different." "Different how?" "Happy, like you're not carrying something heavy anymore." David set aside the newspaper and focused his attention on his daughter. She was right. The weight he had carried since his discharge from the military, the sense of incomplete missions and unfinished business, had lifted during the warehouse operation. For the first time in years, he felt like he had accomplished something meaningful. "I helped some people who needed it," David said simply. Emma smiled, the expression lighting up her face in the way that had sustained him through the darkest days of her treatment. "Like how the doctors helped me. Something like that. Are you going to help more people?" David considered the question, thinking about Jennifer's invitation, and the ongoing investigations that would require people with his skills and experience.
The world was full of predators and victims, networks that operated in darkness and secrecy. But it was also full of people like the Walsh twins, individuals who refused to accept injustice, and who had the courage to fight for strangers they would never meet. Maybe, David said. Would that be okay with you? Emma nodded seriously. Heroes should help people, Daddy, even when it's scary. David reached over and took her hand, feeling the strength in her small fingers, and the wisdom in her words. Outside the hospital window, the city continued its restless motion, unaware of the networks that had been dismantled, or the lives that had been saved. But in this quiet room, a father and daughter had found peace in the knowledge that sometimes, when good people chose to act, the darkness could be pushed back. David's phone buzzed with a text message from an encrypted number he recognized. New intelligence suggests trafficking network operating out of Miami. Interested in a consulting opportunity. David looked at Emma, then at the message, then back at his daughter. She was watching him with eyes that held understanding beyond her years. Go help them, Daddy, she said quietly. I'll be okay. David smiled and typed his response. Send me the details. The war against trafficking would continue, but now he knew he wouldn't be fighting it alone. Somewhere in the city, two remarkable teenagers were already planning their next operation, building networks of allies, and evidence that would save lives, and bring justice to victims who had been forgotten by everyone else. And in this hospital room, an 8-year-old girl who had faced her own battle against impossible odds was teaching her father that sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is simply refuse to give up on people who need help. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years it felt full of possibility, rather than just survival. David Chen was no longer hiding from his past, or running from his purpose. He was exactly where he belonged, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The mission continued, and he was ready. 6 months had passed since the warehouse operation that dismantled Marcus Blackwood's trafficking empire, and the autumn air carried a crispness that reminded David Chen of new beginnings. He stood in the parking lot of Riverside Elementary, watching Emma race across the playground with the boundless energy of a child who had forgotten what it felt like to be sick. Her laughter echoed across the schoolyard, mixing with the voices of dozens of other children whose biggest concerns were homework assignments and playground disputes. The normalcy of the moment felt almost surreal after the intensity of the past year. David had returned to his maintenance job, but now it felt like a choice rather than hiding. The vending machines still needed restocking. The park still required cleaning, but the work no longer felt like penance for failures he couldn't fix. It felt like honest labor that allowed him to provide for his daughter while remaining available for the kinds of missions that mattered. His phone buzzed with a message from Jennifer Walsh Coffee Shop on 5th Street. 1 hour. New development you need to see. David smiled as he typed his response. The Walsh twins had become something between colleagues and family over the months since their father's rescue. Detective James Walsh had returned to active duty with the Metro Police, now heading a specialized task force focused on human trafficking investigations. Sarah and Jennifer continued their unofficial consulting work, but under their father's supervision and with proper legal channels established for their intelligence gathering. The coffee shop had become their unofficial headquarters, a neutral location where they could meet without attracting the attention that might follow visits to police stations or government buildings. David arrived to find Jennifer already seated at their usual corner table, her laptop open and displaying the kind of complex data analysis that had become her trademark. David, we have a problem, Jennifer said without preamble as he sat down. 3 girls have disappeared from local high schools in the past 2 weeks, different neighborhoods, different social circles, but the pattern matches what we saw with Blackwood's network. David leaned forward, his relaxed mood immediately shifting to professional focus. I thought we dismantled the entire operation. We did, but criminal enterprises don't just disappear when you arrest the leadership. Other organizations move in to fill the vacuum, sometimes using the same infrastructure and contacts. Jennifer pulled up surveillance footage on her screen, showing teenagers at bus stops, shopping centers, and school parking lots. Someone's been watching these girls, documenting their routines, identifying vulnerabilities. The footage was professionally shot, suggesting equipment and expertise beyond what typical predators possessed. David recognized the methodical approach of organized recruitment, the same systematic evaluation that had characterized Blackwood's operations. "Have you identified any suspects?" David asked. "That's where it gets complicated." Jennifer switched to a different file showing financial records and communication intercepts. The funding appears to be coming from overseas sources, but the operational structure is completely different from what we've seen before. Instead of a centralized organization, this looks like a franchise model. David studied the data, noting patterns that suggested coordination without centralized command. Multiple small cells operating independently but following similar protocols, sharing resources and intelligence while maintaining operational security through compartmentalization. "Franchise trafficking," David murmured. "Someone selling the business model rather than running the operations directly." "Exactly. And that someone has been studying our methods. They know how we dismantled Blackwood's network, and they've designed countermeasures specifically to prevent the same kind of investigation." Jennifer's expression darkened with frustration. "They're using our own success against us." Sarah Walsh appeared at their table, having approached with the silent movement that had become second nature during their previous operations. She carried a tablet displaying technical analysis that looked even more concerning than Jennifer's intelligence summary. "The digital infrastructure is completely different," Sarah said, sitting down and pulling up network diagrams. "Instead of centralized servers and communication systems, they're using distributed networks that are nearly impossible to trace. Every cell operates independently with communication limited to encrypted channels that self-destruct after single use." David absorbed the technical explanation while considering the tactical implications. The new organization had learned from Blackwood's mistakes, implementing security measures designed to prevent the kind of comprehensive takedown that had destroyed the previous network. "What about local law enforcement?" David asked. Jennifer's expression became even more serious. "That's the other problem. Someone in the police department is feeding information to the trafficking cells. Every time Dad's task force gets close to an operation, the suspects disappear hours before raids. Equipment is moved, personnel vanish, evidence gets destroyed." The revelation that law enforcement had been compromised added another layer of complexity to an already difficult situation. David had worked with corrupt officials in overseas operations, understanding how institutional betrayal could undermine even the most carefully planned missions. "Do you have suspects within the department?" David asked. "3 possibilities, all with access to task force information and personal financial pressures that could motivate cooperation with criminal organizations." Jennifer showed him personnel files displaying police officers whose circumstances made them vulnerable to recruitment. "But we can't investigate them through official channels without alerting the leak," Sarah added. "We need to identify and neutralize the corruption while simultaneously disrupting the trafficking operations. And we need to do it without compromising the girls who are already missing." David considered the challenge they faced. Unlike their previous operation against Blackwood's centralized network, this new threat required a different approach. Instead of gathering evidence for a single massive takedown, they would need to conduct multiple coordinated operations while operating under hostile surveillance from within law enforcement itself. "What resources do we have?" David asked. "Limited," Jennifer admitted. "Dad's task force is compromised. Federal agencies are still processing evidence from the Blackwood investigation, and local resources are unreliable. Essentially, we're back to operating independently." But Sarah's expression suggested she had been anticipating this problem. "However, we do have one significant advantage. The evidence we gathered during the warehouse operation has been shared with international partners who are conducting their own investigations. We've established relationships with agencies in 12 countries who are dealing with similar trafficking networks." Jennifer nodded, pulling up a world map showing ongoing investigations across multiple continents. "The franchise model isn't limited to our city.
Similar operations are appearing worldwide, all using variations of the same distributed structure. If we can develop effective countermeasures here, the intelligence can be shared globally." David realized they were describing something larger than a local rescue operation. The Walsh twins were proposing to pioneer new methods for combating evolved trafficking networks, creating a model that could be replicated wherever these franchise operations appeared. "What's the timeline?" David asked. "The 3 missing girls have been gone for 5, 8, and 12 days respectively," Sarah replied. "Based on what we learned about conditioning protocols during the Blackwood investigation, we probably have 72 hours before they're moved to secondary locations where recovery becomes exponentially more difficult." The urgency of the situation was clear, but David also understood that rushing into operations without proper intelligence would likely result in failure and potentially endanger the victims they were trying to save. "I need to make a phone call," David said. Standing from the table, he walked outside and dialed a number he hadn't used since his military discharge. The voice that answered belonged to Colonel Patricia Hayes, his former commanding officer who now worked in Pentagon intelligence coordination. "David Chen," Colonel Hayes said, recognizing his voice immediately. "I was wondering when you'd call. We've been following the trafficking investigations with considerable interest." "Patricia, I need a favor. Unofficial channels, deniable assets, the kind of support that doesn't appear in any reports. What are you dealing with?" David provided a concise briefing on the evolved trafficking network and the compromised local investigation. Colonel Hayes listened without interruption, asking only technical questions that indicated she understood both the operational challenges and the strategic implications. "David, what you're describing matches intelligence we've been gathering about similar networks in Europe and Southeast Asia. The franchise model represents a significant evolution in organized crime methodology." Colonel Hayes paused and David could hear computer keyboards in the background. "I can provide technical support and analytical resources, but any operational activities will need to remain completely unofficial." "Understood. What kind of timeline are we looking at?" "Give me 6 hours to coordinate resources. You'll receive contact information for assets who can provide surveillance, communication security, and technical analysis." "But David, if this goes wrong, there's no official backup." David returned to the coffee shop where the Walsh twins were conducting detailed planning for surveillance operations designed to identify trafficking cell locations and corrupt law enforcement personnel. Their methodology combined traditional investigative techniques with sophisticated digital analysis, creating a comprehensive approach that maximized their limited resources. "We have support," David announced, sitting back down at their table. "Unofficial, deniable but professional level resources." Jennifer looked up from her planning documents. "What kind of support?" "The kind that comes with no questions asked and no official acknowledgement. But also the kind that might make the difference between success and disaster." Sarah was already modifying her technical plans to incorporate additional resources. "With proper support, we could potentially identify all active trafficking cells simultaneously, coordinate rescue operations across multiple locations, and gather evidence comprehensive enough to prosecute the entire network." David studied their faces, noting the determination that had characterized their previous operations but also recognizing the additional weight of responsibility they were accepting. The Walsh twins were no longer just investigating their father's disappearance or responding to immediate threats. They were choosing to become permanent opponents of trafficking networks wherever those networks operated. "Are you sure you want to continue down this path?" David asked. "Once we start this operation, there's no returning to normal life. These organizations don't forget enemies, and they don't accept defeat quietly." Jennifer and Sarah exchanged one of their silent communications, the kind of wordless conversation that only twins seemed capable of conducting. Then Jennifer spoke for both of them. "Mr. Chen, 6 months ago we were just 2 kids whose father had disappeared. Now we're investigators who have dismantled international trafficking operations and saved hundreds of lives. We didn't choose this path, but we've discovered we're good at it," Sarah added. "And every day we spend trying to return to normal life is another day that girls like us disappear into networks that destroy lives for profit. We can't unknow what we know or pretend we don't have the skills to fight back." David nodded, understanding their decision while also recognizing the sacrifice it represented. The Walsh twins were choosing to dedicate their lives to a fight that would never truly end, accepting the constant danger and responsibility that came with opposing organized crime.
His phone buzzed with encrypted messages containing contact information and operational protocols. The resources Colonel Hayes had promised were already being deployed, creating a network of support that would allow them to conduct operations beyond anything they had attempted previously. "All right," David said, studying the incoming intelligence. "We have 72 hours to identify trafficking cell locations, neutralize the law enforcement leak, and rescue 3 missing girls. We also need to document everything comprehensively enough to provide a model for similar operations worldwide." Jennifer smiled with the confidence of someone who had already accomplished the impossible once, just another day at the office. As they began detailed operational planning, David realized that his life had fundamentally changed during the warehouse operation 6 months earlier. He was no longer a former soldier trying to build a quiet life with his daughter. He had become part of something larger, a network of people dedicated to fighting trafficking and protecting victims who had no other champions. But most importantly, he had found a way to be the kind of father Emma deserved, someone who stood up for people who needed help, even when it was dangerous, even when it was difficult, even when the world seemed determined to look away. The mission was beginning again, and this time, they were ready for whatever came next. The surveillance footage from the high school parking lot revealed details that made David's stomach clench with recognition. Detective Maria Santos of the Metro Police Task Force stood beside her unmarked vehicle, apparently conducting routine questioning of students about the missing girls. But David's trained eye caught the subtle signals. She was actually transmitting hand gestures that indicated locations, timing marks that suggested coordination, and positioning that provided clear sightlines for observers she knew were watching. Sarah Walsh enhanced the digital image quality, while Jennifer cross-referenced the timing with communication intercepts they had been monitoring. The evidence was damning but required careful handling to avoid alerting Santos to their discovery of her betrayal. "She's not just feeding information to the trafficking network," Jennifer observed, studying the patterns of Santos's activities over the past month. "She's actively participating in victim identification and recruitment." David had worked with corrupt officials before, but the systematic nature of Santos's involvement represented something more dangerous than simple bribery or coercion. This was ideological commitment to criminal enterprise, the kind of corruption that couldn't be reasoned with or reformed. "What's her motivation?" David asked. Sarah pulled up financial records showing Santos's personal circumstances over the past 2 years. Gambling debts, primarily offshore accounts that total nearly $200,000. But the payments she's receiving from the trafficking network exceed her debt obligations by a significant margin. "Greed," Jennifer concluded. "She started cooperating to pay off debts but continued because the money was too good to refuse." The tactical implications were clear. Santos had access to all task force operations, communication protocols, and investigative priorities. Any rescue attempt conducted through official channels would be compromised before teams reached their targets. But her corruption also presented an opportunity for deception and misdirection. David's encrypted phone buzzed with an update from the Pentagon resources Colonel Hayes had provided. Technical analysis teams had identified 3 potential locations where the missing girls might be held, based on communication patterns and logistical requirements of the franchise trafficking cells. "We have targets," David announced, sharing the intelligence with the twins. 3 facilities in different parts of the city, all showing signs of recent security upgrades and unusual activity patterns. Jennifer studied the locations on her tactical mapping software. Industrial warehouse, abandoned office building, and what appears to be a residential property that's been modified for security. Classic compartmentalized operation. Sarah was already conducting digital reconnaissance of the target sites. Each location has different electronic signatures. The warehouse shows minimal technology but heavy physical security. The office building has sophisticated communication equipment but appears lightly guarded. The residential property has both electronic and physical security measures. David recognized the pattern from his military experience. The trafficking cells were using different facilities for different stages of their operation: initial holding, processing and conditioning, and final preparation for transport. The missing girls were likely distributed across all 3 locations depending on how long they had been in custody. "We need to hit all 3 simultaneously," David said. "If any cell realizes they're under attack, they'll alert the others and potentially eliminate evidence or victims." Jennifer nodded but raised the obvious challenge. We don't have the personnel for coordinated operations across 3 locations. Even with Pentagon support, we're talking about maybe a dozen people total. But Sarah's expression suggested she had been anticipating this problem. Actually, we might have more resources than we realize. The international partnerships we established during the Blackwood investigation have been monitoring similar franchise operations worldwide. I've been in communication with teams in London, Brussels and Bangkok who are facing identical challenges. Sarah pulled up a secure communication interface showing active discussions with investigators across multiple time zones. The scope of coordination was impressive, with teams sharing real-time intelligence and tactical resources despite operating in different countries under different legal systems. Synchronized global operations, David realized, hit the franchise networks simultaneously worldwide to prevent adaptation and resource shifting. Jennifer was already modifying their operational timeline to coordinate with international partners. London team is ready to move in 6 hours. Brussels needs 12 hours for preparation. Bangkok is waiting for confirmation of target locations. The complexity of coordinating operations across multiple jurisdictions while maintaining operational security was staggering, but David understood the strategic value. If successful, they could potentially dismantle the entire franchise model permanently, preventing its replication in other regions. David's phone rang with a call from Detective James Walsh. "David, we have a problem. Santos just requested immediate access to the task force evidence files related to trafficking investigations. She's claiming federal oversight requires comprehensive documentation. She's preparing to sanitize the files," David replied. "Probably under orders to eliminate any evidence that could connect local operations to the broader network." "That's what I figured. How do you want to handle this?" David looked at the twins, who were already implementing countermeasures through their digital access to police systems. "Give her what she wants, but make sure it's exactly what we want her to have. We're going to use her corruption against the entire network." Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard as she prepared modified evidence files that would appear authentic while actually containing false information designed to misdirect trafficking cell preparations. Location data that suggested operations in the wrong areas, timing information that indicated attacks at incorrect moments, and resource allocation that would cause security personnel to be positioned uselessly. "Disinformation campaign," Sarah explained as she worked. "Santos will deliver intelligence that causes the trafficking cells to prepare for threats that won't materialize while leaving them vulnerable to our actual operations." Jennifer coordinated with international partners to ensure the false intelligence would be tailored to create maximum confusion without alerting the networks to coordinated deception. The level of sophistication required was beyond what most government agencies could achieve, but the Walsh twins had developed capabilities that existed in the intersection between official resources and innovative methodology. An hour later, Santos received her requested evidence files and immediately transmitted summarized versions to encrypted communication channels the twins were monitoring. The false intelligence propagated through the trafficking network exactly as designed, causing visible changes in security preparations at all 3 target locations. "They're repositioning guards based on our disinformation," Jennifer reported, watching surveillance feeds that showed personnel movements at the warehouse facility. "Physical security is being concentrated in areas where they expect attacks that won't come." David studied the developing tactical picture, noting how the false intelligence was creating opportunities that hadn't existed before. Guard positions were becoming predictable, communication patterns were revealing command structures, and resource allocation was creating vulnerabilities they could exploit. "Pentagon assets are in position," David announced as encrypted updates confirmed that Colonel Hayes's teams had reached observation points around all 3 target facilities. "Technical support is active, surveillance is comprehensive, and extraction resources are standing by." Sarah finished implementing electronic countermeasures designed to disrupt trafficking cell communications during the rescue operations. "When we initiate, their networks will be isolated. No coordination between cells, no communication with external contacts, no ability to alert higher-level command structures." Jennifer reviewed the final operational timeline with international partners, confirming that teams in 3 countries would begin their operations within a 30-minute window. "Global coordination is confirmed. We move in 20 minutes. David checked his equipment one final time, tactical gear that would allow him to operate in hostile environments, communication devices that connected him to both local and international teams, and weapons appropriate for close-quarters combat in facilities that might contain innocent victims. But before they began the operation, David's phone buzzed with a message from Emma's school. His daughter was safe participating in an after-school program under the supervision of teachers who had been briefed on potential security concerns. The reminder of what he was fighting for provided focus that no amount of tactical preparation could match. "Everyone ready?" David asked the twins. Sarah closed her laptop and shouldered a backpack containing portable technical equipment. "Digital infrastructure is compromised and ready for activation. Electronic countermeasures are in place." Jennifer packed tactical planning documents and communication devices. "International coordination is confirmed. All teams are synchronized and standing by." David felt the familiar pre-mission adrenaline, the heightened awareness that came with approaching operations where lives hung in the balance. But this time the stakes felt different. They weren't just conducting a rescue mission, they were testing new methods for combating evolved criminal networks that could be replicated worldwide. "Let's bring those girls home," David said. The warehouse district looked exactly as it had during the Blackwood operation 6 months earlier, but David approached this mission with knowledge earned through experience. The trafficking cells had learned from their predecessors' mistakes, but David and the Walsh twins had also evolved their methods and capabilities. Sarah activated her electronic countermeasures as they reached the perimeter of the warehouse facility. Communication networks that connected the trafficking cells to each other and to their command structure immediately became unreliable, creating the isolation necessary for successful rescue operations. Jennifer's voice crackled through their communication system with updates from international operations.
London confirms target penetration. Brussels is encountering heavier resistance than expected. Bangkok is proceeding on schedule. David moved through the warehouse complex with the efficiency of someone who had trained for exactly this kind of operation. Physical security that had been repositioned based on false intelligence was ineffective against approaches they weren't designed to counter. Guards who expected attacks from specific directions found themselves facing threats from unexpected angles. But the most important discovery came when David reached the holding areas where victims were being kept. 3 teenage girls, traumatized but alive, along with evidence that confirmed the scope of the franchise operation. Documentation showed connections to networks in 12 countries, financial systems that processed millions of dollars in transactions, and recruitment methods that had successfully identified and captured hundreds of victims worldwide. Package secured, David reported as medical teams began treating the rescued girls. Evidence indicates global networks significantly larger than initial estimates. Sarah's voice responded with equal parts satisfaction and concern. Electronic intelligence confirms your assessment. This franchise model has been implemented across 4 continents with coordination from a central management structure we haven't identified yet. Jennifer added updates from international partners. London recovered 14 victims and arrested 32 suspects. Brussels found evidence of connections to European organized crime syndicates. Bangkok discovered links to government corruption at the ministerial level. As the immediate rescue operation concluded successfully, David realized they had accomplished something unprecedented. Not just the salvation of immediate victims, but the development of methods for combating criminal networks that transcended traditional investigative boundaries. Detective Santos's arrest an hour later provided confirmation that their counterintelligence operation had been completely successful. She was found in possession of falsified evidence and communication records that proved her active participation in trafficking operations, while her phones contained messages that revealed the full scope of law enforcement corruption. David stood in the warehouse parking lot as emergency vehicles transported rescued victims to hospitals and arrested suspects to detention facilities. The operation had succeeded beyond their initial objectives, but the evidence they had gathered suggested the fight was far from over. Sarah approached him carrying hard drives and documentation that would require months of analysis. "David, what we found tonight changes everything. The franchise model is just the beginning. There's a central organization that's been developing and distributing criminal methodologies across multiple industries." Jennifer added, "Human trafficking is apparently just one product line.
They're also franchising drug distribution networks, money laundering operations, and cybercrime methodologies. We've stumbled onto something that makes Blackwood's network look like amateur hour. David absorbed the implications while watching Emma's school bus pull into the parking lot, where he had arranged to meet her. His daughter jumped off the bus with her usual enthusiasm, running toward him with the kind of joy that reminded him why every dangerous mission was worthwhile. "Daddy, how was your work today?" Emma asked as she hugged him. David looked over her head at the Walsh twins, who were already planning their next investigation into the central organization behind the franchise criminal networks. Then he looked down at his daughter, whose innocent question deserved an honest answer. "It was a good day, sweetheart. We helped some people who really needed it." Emma smiled with the pride of someone who understood that her father was fighting for something important. "Are you going to help more people tomorrow?" David considered the evidence they had discovered, the international partnerships they had forged, and the criminal empire they had only begun to understand. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new victims who needed rescue, and new battles against organizations that treated human suffering as a business opportunity. "Probably," David said, lifting Emma into his arms. "But tonight I'm just going to be your dad." As they walked toward his car, David felt the weight of responsibility that came with knowledge of ongoing atrocities. But he also felt the strength that came from having allies like the Walsh twins, resources like Colonel Hayes's Pentagon support, and most importantly, a daughter who reminded him daily that some things were worth fighting for no matter the cost. The war against trafficking networks would continue, but tonight they had won an important battle and saved lives that mattered. And sometimes that was enough to sustain hope for tomorrow's missions. 2 years later, David Chen stood in the arrivals terminal of Bangkok International Airport, watching passengers emerge from customs with the practiced eye of someone who had learned to spot predators in crowds. His appearance had changed subtly since the warehouse operations that first brought him together with the Walsh twins. The maintenance worker's uniform had been replaced by the kind of understated professional attire that allowed him to blend into international business environments without attracting unwanted attention. Emma walked beside him, now 10 years old and carrying herself with the quiet confidence of a child who had learned that her father's work mattered to people around the world. Her cancer remained in complete remission, but more importantly, she had developed an understanding of justice and protection that went far beyond her years. "Dad, is this where Sarah found the connection to the Australian networks?" Emma asked, studying the busy terminal with interest rather than fear. David nodded, noting how naturally his daughter had absorbed the vocabulary and concepts of international anti-trafficking operations. She traced financial transactions from Bangkok to Sydney that led to the arrest of 43 suspects and the rescue of over 200 victims. The Walsh twins approached from the international arrival gate, no longer the 13-year-old investigators who had recruited David at a subway station, but young women who had spent 2 years developing capabilities that rival government agencies couldn't match. Sarah carried equipment cases containing digital forensics tools that had been refined through dozens of operations. Jennifer wheeled luggage that contained operational planning materials for their current mission. David, Emma, Sarah greeted them with the warm familiarity of family rather than colleagues. The Thai authorities have confirmed the target location and provided tactical support. "We're looking at a facility that processes victims from 7 countries before moving them to final destinations worldwide." Jennifer added, "The central organization we identified during the Santos investigation has a major coordination hub here. If we can document their operations comprehensively, we might be able to dismantle the entire franchise network permanently." David had learned to appreciate the scope of what the Walsh twins had accomplished during their 2-year partnership. The techniques they had developed for combating trafficking networks were now being used by law enforcement agencies across 4 continents. The international coordination network they had built had prevented thousands of kidnappings and rescued victims who would otherwise have disappeared forever. But the cost of their success had been significant. All 3 of them lived under constant security protocols. Emma attended school with protective details that most children would never need. The Walsh twins had sacrificed normal adolescent experiences for a life dedicated to fighting criminal organizations that never forgot their enemies. Emma looked up at Jennifer with the serious expression she wore when discussing important matters. Jennifer, after you stop the bad people here, will there be more bad people somewhere else? Jennifer knelt down to meet Emma's eyes, treating the question with the respect it deserved. Yes, there probably will be. But every time we stop them, we save people who matter. People like you, people with families who love them, people who deserve to be safe. So you'll keep fighting them. As long as they exist, we'll keep fighting them. Emma nodded solemnly, then smiled with the kind of wisdom that emerged from watching heroes work. Then I want to help when I'm older. David felt his chest tighten with pride and concern. His daughter had inherited his sense of justice, but he hoped she would never need to face the dangers that had defined his partnership with the Walsh twins. The operation in Bangkok proceeded with the efficiency that had characterized their previous missions. Thai law enforcement provided perimeter security, while David and the twins conducted precise strikes against trafficking facilities that had been operating for years without detection. Sarah's electronic warfare capabilities had evolved to include real-time disruption of criminal communication networks. Jennifer's tactical planning now incorporated lessons learned from operations across multiple countries. The rescue results exceeded their expectations. 67 victims from 12 countries were recovered and provided with medical care and repatriation support. Evidence was gathered that documented the complete operational structure of the Central Criminal Organization, including financial networks, personnel hierarchies, and coordination protocols. But the most significant discovery came from encrypted servers that Sarah accessed during the digital infiltration phase of the operation. The franchise criminal organization had been developing new methodologies that went beyond human trafficking into areas that threatened global security. David, you need to see this, Sarah said as they conducted post-operation analysis in a secure hotel conference room. The central organization isn't just franchising criminal activities, they're developing and selling destabilization technologies to anyone willing to pay. The intelligence Sarah had uncovered revealed criminal enterprise on a scale that dwarfed anything they had previously encountered. Technologies for disrupting electoral systems, methodologies for creating refugee crises, and coordination systems for synchronized attacks on infrastructure across multiple countries. Jennifer reviewed the evidence with the analytical precision that had made her invaluable to international law enforcement. This goes beyond organized crime into international terrorism and state-sponsored destabilization. We're looking at threats to global security that require response from the highest levels of government. David understood the implications immediately. The success of their anti-trafficking operations had led them to discover criminal activities that were beyond what any private organization could address. The evidence would need to be turned over to intelligence agencies and international security organizations with resources for global response. What happens to our partnership? David asked. Sarah and Jennifer exchanged one of their silent communications, the wordless conversation that had characterized their relationship since childhood. Then Sarah spoke for both of them. The anti-trafficking work continues. There are still networks operating, still victims who need rescue, still criminal organizations that prey on vulnerable people. But the global security threats require different capabilities and different partnerships. Jennifer added, we've been approached by several international agencies who want to formalize our consulting relationship. The methods we've developed could be applied to counter-terrorism, cyber warfare, and organized crime investigations worldwide. David realized they were describing the end of their informal partnership and the beginning of something larger and more institutionally supported. The Walsh twins would continue fighting criminal organizations, but with official backing and resources that would allow them to operate on a global scale. And Emma and me? David asked. Emma looked up from the corner where she had been quietly reading while the adults discussed operational matters. Dad, I think we should go home. I want to finish 4th grade and maybe learn to play soccer, but I also want to visit Sarah and Jennifer when they save more people. David smiled at his daughter's practical wisdom. She understood that heroes needed to fight where the battles were most important, but she also understood that normal life had value that couldn't be sacrificed completely to necessary wars. 6 months later, David stood in the same community park where he had first encountered the Walsh twins protecting victims from predators. But now he wore the uniform of a park ranger, rather than a maintenance worker, and his role included coordination with law enforcement agencies when suspicious activities were reported. Emma played on the playground equipment with other children whose biggest concerns were homework and playground politics. Her laughter echoed across the grass, mixing with voices that reminded David why quiet moments of safety were worth protecting. His radio crackled with a message from Jennifer Walsh, now working with Interpol headquarters in Lyon, France. David, we just completed an operation in Lagos that rescued 43 victims and arrested a trafficking cell that was using methods we documented in Bangkok. The techniques we developed are still saving lives. David responded with quiet satisfaction. Any word from Sarah? She's in Singapore, working with cybersecurity teams to prevent the destabilization technologies from being deployed. Apparently she's enjoying the challenge of fighting criminals who think they're smarter than she is. David laughed, remembering Sarah's quiet confidence during their most dangerous operations. Send her my regards. And thank you both for everything you taught me about fighting for what matters. Thank you for teaching us that sometimes the most important battles are the ones nobody else wants to fight. As David ended the radio conversation, Emma ran over from the playground with the kind of excitement that belonged to childhood discoveries. Dad, there's a new girl at school who doesn't speak much English and she seems scared all the time. Do you think we should help her? David knelt down to meet his daughter's eyes, seeing in her face the same instinct for protecting vulnerable people that had driven him to partner with the Walsh twins. What do you think we should do? Emma considered the question with the seriousness she applied to important decisions. I think we should be her friend and make sure she knows she's safe. And if someone is trying to hurt her, we should tell people who can help. David hugged his daughter, feeling the weight of lessons learned and values passed from one generation to the next. That sounds like exactly the right thing to do. As they walked home through neighborhood streets where children played safely and families lived without fear of predators, David reflected on the journey that had brought him from a discharged soldier avoiding his past to a man who had helped develop new methods for fighting international criminal organizations. The Walsh twins continued their work with official support and global reach. Victims around the world were safer because of techniques they had pioneered. Criminal networks that had operated with impunity for years were being systematically dismantled through methods that combined traditional investigation with innovative technology. But perhaps most importantly, David had learned that heroism wasn't about medals or recognition or dramatic victories. It was about choosing to stand between predators and victims, even when that choice meant personal sacrifice. It was about teaching the next generation that some fights were worth having, even when they were difficult and dangerous. Emma skipped beside him as they approached their house, chattering about school friends and soccer practice and the book she was reading about marine biology. Her life was filled with the normal concerns and joys of childhood, protected by people who had chosen to fight so that innocence could exist safely. David's phone buzzed with a news alert about a major trafficking network that had been dismantled in Eastern Europe using techniques developed during their partnership with the Walsh twins. Hundreds of victims had been rescued, dozens of criminals arrested, and evidence gathered that would prevent similar operations for years to come. He smiled and deleted the alert without reading the details. The work continued around the world, carried forward by people who had learned that ordinary individuals could accomplish extraordinary things when they chose to act with courage and determination. Tonight David Chen was simply a father walking home with his daughter, enjoying the quiet peace that existed because somewhere people like the Walsh twins were still fighting to make the world safer for children like Emma. The mission would always continue, but for now, this moment of safety and happiness was enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.